Before we begin, now this is kind of a long blog. It's a summary of my thoughts about what I consider a useful approach to beginning Dharma practice. Now, I'm not saying that this is the only way to do it. It's just the way, and it's the way that this works is within the scope of what an average person can do. I mean, given the busy life that most of us live these days, perhaps we live in a more fast-moving times than in the past, and we need a method that works faster rather than slower. And for me, this is it. So this will be tedious for some of you, but for those who really are sincere and want to try to figure out how to make the best use of their time that will actually give you results that you can see in the short term, as far as I've been able to tell, this is it. As simple as the standard way that we've all heard of learning, sitting meditation, sitting on a cushion, which is called officially in Sanskrit shamatha, but in English tranquility meditation, learning to be, to be calm, sitting on the cushion. Now, even that, just sitting on a cushion, is still fairly abstract for the average American. Not, of course, are managing to sit on a cushion each day, but more about how do we learn to sit on a cushion, and how do we learn to stop practicing meditation and actually just meditate. That's the problem. Now, for most of us, it takes a long time to learn tranquility meditation, shamatha. And I feel it's also helpful to understand how the common practice of sitting meditation, how it ended up being the basic practice that we first learned in this country. I mean, it's what everyone knows about. And the history of it was to me totally revealing. And so I'm going to share it with you to the best that I understand it. According to a highly trained Tibetan Rinpoche that I know, a Kempo at that, which means very highly educated, in Tibet, Dharma students don't start out learning to sit on a cushion. They don't start out with sitting meditation. Now, why? It's because tranquility meditation, sitting, is considered difficult enough that Tibetans have a whole series of practices they feel we should go through before we start sitting meditation. And in fact, these practices are called the common preliminaries, preliminary practices. And after that, there are others that are called the extraordinary preliminaries. And only after that is tranquility meditation, sitting meditation like we heard about it, is that generally taught. Now, why was this approach that is used in Tibet not taught here in the United States when I first came over? As it was explained to me, when Tibetan Buddhism first really began to take hold here in the States, the extraordinary preliminaries were in fact taught, or at least there was an attempt to teach them. However, they are so physically difficult, and it takes so much practice and long practice at that Americans were just not having any of it. So, rather than force the issue, many Tibetan teachers like the Venerable Chogyam Trungpa Rinpoche kind of put the preliminaries on the back burner and instead taught sitting meditation straight out. And maybe that was because Americans had already accepted the idea of sitting meditation practice from the influence of Zen Buddhism, and that had entered this country decades before Tibetan Buddhism really caught on. Now, They did introduce to some few what I mentioned above, the extraordinary preliminaries, but only after they had folks sitting in tranquility meditation, rather than as in Tibet, they do it before they introduce sitting meditation. I hope I'm not confusing you. Where the preliminary practices had kind of served as a warm-up, as warm-up exercises to get the mind limber enough so that you could actually learn to meditate. So the bottom line is that in this country, instead of preliminary practice, sitting meditation was taught cold turkey, so to speak, with no warm-up exercises at all. And this is how I discovered it. I was pretty much taught sitting meditation, but that's another story. So, and when I say warm-up exercises, I don't just mean rubbing our hands together. I mean a serious commitment, so serious that no one I know, or few way back then, would even think of doing it straight out. I know that it scared the bejesus out of me just hearing about it. And to give you a sense of what serious means here, the extraordinary preliminaries, which is called Nundro in Tibetan, involve doing 5 specific practices in sequence, each 111,111 times, each of them. And so that didn't happen in just a day. And just briefly, the practice involves doing 111,111 full-length prostrations on the ground, from standing to lying on the ground with your arms fully extended in front of your head, and then getting back up again, and doing that many times. And with that, also reciting a Buddhist refuge prayer 111,111 times. Next, you do and memorize a 100-syllable mantra, and you do that 111,111 times, along with a very specific visualization. It's a cleansing, purification technique. And after that, you offer 111,111 mandala offerings, which involve carefully placing a number of small piles of rice on a copper plate in a certain order, and again with a very specific visualization and prayers. And finally, the last of the exercises you do is what's called Guru Yoga, and you do it 111,111 times, again with a full visualization and specific mantras. And that, my friends, having done this twice, is not nothing. Now, the takeaway here that I'm trying to, or I would like you to consider, is that in Tibet, they did all of this that I just described above before they were introduced to sitting meditation. I'm not saying that all the Tibetan lineages do this, but many do, including the one that I've been trained in. So it's really no wonder that Americans balked, and no doubt gulped, when they first heard about the extraordinary preliminaries, and they didn't want to do it. Good God, it looked like, to me, like something out of the Middle Ages. Anyway, that's how it has been explained to me, and also how I experienced it. And the upshot of this approach, reversing the order of practice, is that we go into tranquility meditation, sitting practice, without the benefit of doing all the preliminary practices I described above. And these extraordinary preliminaries are what I like to call Dharma boot camp, because they are very difficult and they can take years to complete. Okay, my point so far is that if learning tranquility meditation, sitting meditation, has not been a breeze for you so far, or a solid success, meaning that you're still trying to learn it, you might want to consider some of these warm-up exercises to limber up the mind. And with that said, I want to introduce to you an alternate consideration, and that's the whole point of this, is to show you where I think is a useful way to begin. All of the beginning Dharma practices, including the various preliminaries that I mentioned, plus sitting meditation itself, are all preliminary to achieving some degree of realization through an event that is called, in Tibetan Buddhism, recognition. And that just means recognizing the actual nature of your own mind. Now, I'm not going to go into recognition here, but I do want to point out something further about completing these preliminaries. Another practice that is also considered preliminary is called lojong, and it involves beginning to work with our habitual dualistic thinking, habits such as, me as opposed to you, or we but not them, and so on. Our tradition of dividing everything into subject and object, as if there were a clear division between the two. And one of the most efficacious practices in lojong is called tonglen. That's the Tibetan word. There's no Sanskrit word that I know because this is a Tibetan technique. I don't think it came from India, but I could be wrong. Now, this was the first practice that I was given to do, and I was told that Westerners took to it very easily. And without devoting attention here to this standard tonglen, I do want to say something that it's about, as I mentioned above, removing the duality, the divisions between ourself, self and others, just as I talked about, as I mentioned. So, but in a few words, tonglen, the traditional practice, which is also called sending and receiving, or sometimes it's called exchanging yourself for others. It involves willingly taking in all the negativity from others, breathing it into your lungs, and sending back to them, breathing out all of our positive love and goodness. Now, it's a powerful practice, but needless to say that for most of us who are just starting out and who are not Mother Teresa, this practice can, all I can say, be very abstract. It's very hard to get down to where the rubber meets the road, in my experience, although it can be very moving. So, in my opinion, tonglen, the practice of tonglen itself, needs a preliminary practice, one that comes before it. And the one that I suggest is called reaction tonglen. It's a variant. And I have described it here many times before, but let's take a look at the difference between the two tonglens, the traditional tonglen and reaction tonglen. Now, the more traditional, the standard tonglen, is about ourselves making friends with other selves, other people, as well as with the world itself. But on the other hand, reaction tonglen is about first making friends with just our own self before we try to tackle others. Reaction tonglen, as the name suggests, is about our own reactions, our own reactivity in general, whether it is reacting to others directly or to our own internal reactions that are caused by our likes, our dislikes, our biases, our prejudice, what I call self-inflicted wounds. We cause our own problems. Now, if as a type we are highly reactive, if we're highly reactive or overreactive, taking offense and umbrage at just about any old thing, that's like suffering 1,000 razor cuts to our psyche each day, all of which are dutifully and permanently registered or recorded as karma and stored somewhere in our mind stream. Although most of this is registered by us subconsciously, we're not really that aware of it. We typically go through each day innumerable micro cringing, wincing, fearing, worrying, etc. In other words, suffering by way of our own reactions, either in reaction to others in the world, or, and this is the bulk of it, mostly self-inflicted, thanks to our own prejudices, stubbornness, or simple mistakes. We just get things wrong. So, here's my take on all this. Before we can undertake something as difficult as the extraordinary preliminaries, the Nundro, or even the standard tonglen, we would do well to calm down our own reactivity and learn how to stop stirring up the sediment in our mind all the time. And now, allow me please to point out some of the advantages of the reaction tonglen practices as I know it. Reaction tonglen is almost unique in all Dharma practices that I know, um, at least until, as I mentioned before, the event called recognition is reached, when we recognize the nature of the mind. Reaction Tonglen is totally fresh, and freshness is so important. And it's fresh in the present, as in the present moment. Uh, what I'm trying to say is, by definition, it's 100% now, happening in the present moment. And this is because it simply involves becoming aware of our own reactions, literally as they happen throughout the day. And we can't stop our reactions, which are just always fresh. And that's what this practice is all about. You can't get any fresher than catching yourself in a reacting to something that provokes you. And there's some humor in all this, in that reaction Tonglen involves no one but us, no one but ourselves. So there is absolutely no one else to blame for our own reactions but us. Yes, whatever causes us to react, like someone flipping us off, that's not our doing. But our reaction to being flipped off is, as I mentioned, 100% ours. We have to own it. That's what, to me, where the humor is. There's no escaping this conclusion. And this fact is, I think, an extreme kindness in terms of practice, as compared to having a world of other on which we try to blame everything. And we usually do. We find ways of blaming everything but ourselves. But here, our reactions are only ours, and ours alone. Now, I don't know how to say this next point, except that becoming aware of our actual reactions throughout the day is, well, liberating. We have little to no idea how much of our energy each day is tied up in reacting. And I mentioned this, in cringing or wincing or deferring or attempts to ignore, and on and on and on. Whatever we find too hard to take. With even a few weeks of reaction Tonglen, we begin to see that we are in fact calming down. And because of that, we have more and more energy because of it. Now, another wonderful attribute of this practice is that we can do it all day long. We don't have to set time aside to practice reaction Tonglen like we do. We're going to go sit on the cushion or something. And I'm not saying to do this instead of sitting on the cushion. I'm saying this is, if you already have that practice, do it. I'm saying if you have the chance to just begin, this is a great preparation before you start sitting on the cushion. But anyway, doing reaction Tonglen, we can do it as we go through our day, just on the hoof, so to speak. And it adds up what I feel big time. Unlike our daily formal practice, where we might squeeze out an hour, but often less than that, or maybe none at all on given days because we just don't feel like it. Doing this reaction Tonglen, this reaction toning, we amass a very real amount of practice, like all day long. And you can see the effects of practice early on compared to most Dharma practices that I've done. So, to wind this up, my point is that until we have made peace with our own reactive self, we're never going to be very clear-minded, or at least not clear-minded enough to begin some of the more advanced Dharma practices like insight meditation, or even, forgive me, sitting meditation. I find it helpful to first take care of our own garbage, our incessant reactions and reactionary tendencies. And when our reactions are transformed into what I call natural or appropriate responses, that would be a good time to entertain some of the more advanced practices, like even the standard Tonglen. So if you have any questions, you can contact me at michael@erlewine.net. Thanks.